ambassador for education, Shabana. Thank you very much for that introduction. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. PJ, Board of Trustees, families, siblings, friends, and most important, our class of 2016. Congratulations to you all. Oftentimes, commencement speakers are expected to offer some wisdom to the graduating class. I feel too young to be able to do that, and instead, I choose to tell you a story. Probably a story that you don't hear about here in the US. And I'll try to make it very brief. And it's a story about growing up in Afghanistan as a girl. And at the same time, I just said I feel too young to tell you, share a few words of wisdom. You guys, the graduating class, make me a bit too old because I can't tell you to go back with me 20 years from today. But 1996, exactly 20 years ago, was when the Taliban regime in Afghanistan took over. I was 6 years old, and that's when education became illegal for girls. Women couldn't go to work outside the home, and it was perhaps the strangest thing for even people in Afghanistan. We had never lived under such a regime before. I am one of the luckiest Afghan girls you will meet today because I was born in a family that valued education so deeply that my parents decided to cut my hair short, dress me up as a boy, and send me to a secret school. This was an underground school. And that's where my first 6 years of education comes from. Every day, my sister who had to wear a burqa and who couldn't be alone walking outside, and because of whom I had to dress up as a boy to escort her, we would walk an hour to a secret school and an hour back home. We could not afford to create a pattern. Sometimes we would leave early in the morning to walk to the school, sometimes later in the afternoon. Sometimes as we walked out of our door, we would go right or left or straight. The walk was perhaps 35 minutes to 40 minutes, but we had to make it longer because we had to choose different roads. We could not afford to have somebody outside suspect that we were going to the same place every day. Why? Because we were not only responsible for our safety, we were responsible for the safety of around 100 other girls who came into that living room to study. Even at that really young age, we all knew that if any of us made a slightly small mistake of leading the Taliban to that school, the punishment was severe. Oftentimes beheading of the teachers, students, families, in front of everybody. There was something strange about that time, now that I think about it. I grew up thinking that was normal, because I had no other comparison for that time. My older siblings did, my parents did, but I didn't. I thought that was normal until 9/11 happened. I didn't know this country existed until 9/11. I couldn't believe the story because I couldn't comprehend the fact that human beings had the capacity to build tall buildings like the Twin Towers. My first question was, how many days does it take to go from the first floor to the top floor? We were lucky if we had 2 hours of electricity in a week. We were not allowed to watch TV, listen to music. So think of an entire nation completely isolated from the rest of the world. Anyways, let's fast forward to 2006. And I think you can imagine that time. That's when I graduated from high school. I came to the US in 2005 as a high school exchange student. Ended up in Wisconsin where I gained 40 pounds. Was introduced to a lot of cheese and butter popcorn and snacks all the time. I was in the US for 1 year. I loved every single day of my experience. But that was the time when, for the first time in my life, I stepped outside of Afghanistan. I always lived in a Muslim country, majority Muslim country, Muslim. Everyone around me Muslim. And I lived with an American family. And this gave me an opportunity for the first time to look at Afghanistan from an outsider's perspective. I was amazed by the diversity of the questions that I was asked about myself, my family, Afghanistan, my religion. I was even asked if I knew Osama bin Laden, to which I had said yes for a few minutes and freaked people out. But when I was asked that question, I was so shocked that people even could think that I would know Osama bin Laden. A person or a group, an affiliation of a group who was responsible for making me go to a secret school, who made me believe that receiving an education as a young girl was a crime. But that year was more than that for me. It was the year when I realized, how much need there is in Afghanistan. I came here, families telling me this is where my child is going to go to elementary school, that's where they're going to go to middle school, and this is where they're going to go to high school, and that's where they're going to go to college. And my first question is, how do you know? How do you know that's going to happen? I would go back and forth for the next 6 years as a student in this country between a place where there was a lot of certainty to a place where we couldn't take the next hour for granted. To this day, when I travel back and forth between Afghanistan and this country, it feels like I'm traveling back in time. I was most shocked in all of my observations as a student here, learning about Afghanistan, that more than 90% of people in Afghanistan, especially women, don't know how to read and write. Growing up in Afghanistan, I knew that receiving an education as a young girl was a privilege. It wasn't a basic human right. It was a privilege, and I was lucky that I was able to study. But I didn't know the numbers. And when people asked me here, well, what is the literacy rate or literacy rate? I had no idea what they were talking about until I had to look it up. And it overwhelmed me. I was so shocked. I was in, this feeling that I was incredibly lucky, and at the same time I felt so guilty. How is it that I got to be so lucky? What if I was born in a different family? Even some younger girls in my extended family members got married as young as 15, 16, 17. But here I was studying. When I had a dream for myself, my father said, that's not big enough. Dream bigger. My mom would push me, study harder. In my freshman year of college, the UN published a report that said only 6% of women in Afghanistan have a college degree. 6%. And I was about to become a member of that 6% of women in Afghanistan. The fact that I was studying in the US, but also in a place like Middlebury, I couldn't even do the math for myself. Anyways, there's one thing that I guess I could, if there's one thing I want you to walk away from today, about what would be most important for you in the next 4 years, and that's this. It's the choices that you make, especially in the next 4 years. I could have chosen to ignore that. I could have chosen to blend in. I could have chosen to get a job in this country. You know, I went to Middlebury, prepared me to be able to make a life for myself in this country. But instead, I chose to listen to what was bothering me, what I felt wasn't right. I didn't ignore. And it wasn't easy. And I decided to go back to Afghanistan. The boarding school that I started, actually I am not the only person who started. I have a co-founder who is now an 80-year-old American. And in his words, he flunked out retirement and found his second home in Afghanistan after 9/11. And he lived there for more than 12 years. He's now back in the US. But when we first started SOLA, the School of Leadership Afghanistan, it was meant to be a scholarship program for young Afghans to study in boarding schools in the US and then colleges, and then go back to Afghanistan. When I graduated Middlebury, I went back to Afghanistan and decided to turn it into a boarding school. Why? Because it is such a perfect solution to educating young girls and boys in a place like Afghanistan. When you wake up in the morning as a student, what is between you and your classroom? Think about it. Let me tell you what is between an Afghan student, an Afghan boy and an Afghan girl, and school. When a girl gets ready to go to school, first of all, she has to have had the family permission, not just parents, not just father and mother or older brother, but potentially grandfather and uncles and male cousins. And if she's lucky enough to have that support, that permission to be able to go to school, she has the risk, and we're talking 2016, of acid thrown in her face for wanting to go to school. Before she arrives in school, there's a possibility that the Taliban have left what they call a night letter in her school, saying that if they continue to educate girls, they will burn that school. And if she gets to school safely, she's lucky enough to have one of the 10 teachers that she's supposed to have that year show up and teach her. There are high school graduates in rural Afghanistan who cannot even read and write. Initially, when I decided to create this boarding school, it was 9 through 12. Last year, we changed it to 6 through 12. Why? Because I realized that if we want students from all over Afghanistan to have access to quality education, let's get them early. Just when they are ready to either be on the path to study or on the path of a traditional early marriage and all of that. But also, before it gets harder, before there are fewer and fewer teachers to teach her. So get her when she's in 6th grade, prepare her between 6th through 8th grade, and then she can study in an environment where she can compete internationally. So come back to the choices that you're going to make. The next 4 years, I cannot tell you how incredibly important they are. But you are also lucky you come from a community where learning diversity is celebrated. In Afghanistan, you're either good in rote learning and memorizing textbooks, or you are a dumb student. As a top student in my class, when my other classmates failed or couldn't memorize textbooks, or because that was not the way they would learn. You know what their punishment was? My teacher would ask me to slap them. And it was the hardest thing I would ever do. There isn't even an acknowledgement of the different ways we human beings learn in a place like Afghanistan. So let me tell you what that means to you. It means your education that you have gotten in this school and the education that you're going to receive in the next 4 years is not just for you. You have an obligation to think globally, to think to become leaders, not just in this country, but around the world. Because you know that every human being has a different way of learning. Rote learning may have worked for me, but it didn't work for more than 80% of my classmates. And yet that wasn't even understood, not even to this day. Last thing, just as we sit here, you are celebrating all of your graduations, right? There are more than 62 million girls around the world waiting for an opportunity to be in school. And let me tell you something, I am not saying this to make you feel guilty, especially not on this day. I am saying this because all of us have a responsibility. Those 62 million girls are the answer for fighting terrorism, for fighting HIV, Zika, for fighting all of the things that make us concerned about the world. An educated woman will raise educated boys and girls. They will respect. In a developing country, an educated woman tends to spend 90% of her income back in the family. She will have fewer children, healthier children, and she will make sure that her children will have better education than she did. And that's why it's important to get those girls in school. It's not about girls versus boys. So, because we are celebrating you today, I understand that in a country like the US, graduating from high school is, of course, it's going to happen. But it's no simple accomplishment if you look at yourselves as world citizens. It's a great accomplishment that comes with greater responsibility for all of you. So spend the next 4 years studying not just for yourselves, but for the people around the world, in this country and outside of this country, who need you to think globally. And one last thing, don't try to blend too much in college. Be yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thrilled you're here. Please be seated. Last night at the Baccalaureate Awards, we gave to Nathan Leaf and his parents the Pioneer Award, which is Eagle Hill School's highest award. As of last night, it had only been given 14 times in the school's 47-year history. But for your work in Afghanistan, in the United States, for our future partnership as school people, the Board of Trustees authorized to give you the Eagle Hill School Pioneer Award.